Hello and welcome everybody to our Sunday night live stream. Just looking on the camera and realizing I've got a bit of a tan. It's been sunny here in Littlehampton. I don't know what it's like where you have been, but here in Littlehampton it has been quite sunny, and yeah, I do look a little bit tanned. It's nice. It is very nice to get some dry weather. We've managed to do quite a bit of gardening this weekend, as I'm sure you have done as well. Now, coming up tonight, we want to talk about what feeds and fertilizers that you use. There is a reason for this topic. It's something I mentioned, a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, is why do we have so many different feeds and fertilizers? Sorry. That normally happens a bit later on. Yeah, why do we have so many feeds and fertilizers? What are they used for? This is something that is bugging me at the moment because I'm going down the route of keep it simple. As well. Now, let's get into and let's see if anybody is in the chat. And first of all, we've got Adrian saying hello to Richard and all. Good evening to you. Bunny Cillian is saying, good evening, everyone. When are we going to get a dry spell? Sick of all this rain. It's been dry here. It has been dry here, is all I can say. Phineas BB saying, hello, everyone. Good evening to you. Turbo Stream saying, good evening, Veg Podcasters. Good evening to you. We have got Rob's Allotment Gardening. Good evening, all. Hope you've had a good weekend. Indeed, we have. Allotted Chef, in brackets, Nathan. Evening, all. Good evening to you. Welcome along. Please do feel free to join in the conversation. We've got Money Moots. Good evening, all. Had a day without rain. We've had a few days without rain. Have we just been lucky down here? We'll find out, won't we? Emma Jones, evening gardeners. Good evening to you. Scott is there saying, good evening, everyone. The weather here in Cambridge has been lovely. So it's not just been me. We've got Ballycillian. Not for us, Nigel. Heavy showers. Anna Jones, I've had 2 days without rain. Crikey, I've had almost a week without rain. And even before that, we've not had a huge amount of rain. Must be just me that is being lucky. Kate is joined. Good evening, Veg Army. Good evening to you. Rob says, we have had 3 days now without rain. Isn't it amazing? Everyone seems to be so amazed to go without rain. Highgrave Gas, evening everyone. Hope you've had a great week. A really warm weekend, but Thursday night forecast is back down to 1 degree here. We won't put stuff outside just yet. I haven't really looked much ahead for this week, but we'll find out. Digwell says, good evening, everyone. English this week for Richard's benefit. Thank you very much. Thank you for adding that bit of culture as well. Chili Cake, good evening, everyone listening from the allotment tonight. Not sure if Chili Phil is tuning in at home. Chili Phil is tuning in at home. Please do let us know. We can send messages to each other. Chili Kate, what are you doing down on the allotment and what's the weather like where you are? Stuart Jackson says, evening, Richard and the Veg Army. Just keeping everyone in the loop. We made £288 yesterday at our plant sale. That's taken us just to over £18,500 in total. Fantastic. Fantastic. Jenny says, hello, everyone. Hope you're well. Hope you are well too. Amanda in the Facebook group saying evening all. Good evening to you. Annie Jones says, fantastic to Stuart Jackson. Stuart Jackson, I've started making my own banana skin stinging nettles. We've had 3 days of dry weather. So making his own plant feeds, that's something we might get into. Banana skins and stinging nettles to use for that. What have we got? Jenny says, I use Natural Grower organic feed or organic seaweed liquid feed. That's it, nice and easy. I will make nettle, etc., or just chop and drop nettles. Margaret says we can't get you on YouTube. I'm seeing people on YouTube. Can you actually see me? Can you hear me and everything? Or is it just Margaret that's got the problem? Sorry, I'm just distracted by that. Jenny, come back to Jenny's. Natural Grower organic feed. I do have some of that somewhere. Organic seaweed feed. Nice and easy. Then make nettle tea or just chop and drop nettles, comfrey, and docks. And using what she has is going well. Turbo Stream says, we had a storm last weekend, then a mild week, a couple of days with lots of rain, but dry for the last couple of days. Excellent. Let's see. Margaret says it's just us, but Dad has found you. Jenny, I'm on YouTube, as all is well for me. And Anne also says all is okay on YouTube. Excellent. Now, allotted chef, comfrey tea, seaweed liquid, and blood, fish, and bone. Another one saying all good on YouTube. Excellent. So let's get into it. Let's get into this whole topic of plant feeds, fertilizers, and things like that. This is something that I was having a conversation a few weeks ago. It was with Scott and Jenny when we just after the press event, and I was sent by MV these two plant feeds, which is what I'm going to try. But the one that I was particularly intrigued to see is this All Grow, which is an organic all-purpose liquid plant feed. And as it was explained to me, the idea being that this plant feed is one that replaces all other plant feeds. But then they've also got the Maximoto, the tomato plant feed as well. So what this got me wondering is, why do we have so many plant feeds? What do we need them all for? And do we really need them? So let's get into it. Then let's find out from the offset, what plant feeds or fertilizers do you use? What plant feeds and fertilizers do you use? I can see quite a few people are already starting on that conversation. So I want to find out from you. Now, for me, what I tend to try and do, so we've got two different areas. We've got the liquid feeds, and we've got the, which are these ones, these liquid feeds, and then we've got the solid feeds. Now, I have to admit, I am trying to move away from using plant feeds and fertilizers. Obviously, when we're growing food, we need to replenish the soil, the ground, with the nutrients that the plants are taking out, and then we're eating. We need to replenish it in some form or another. But it does become quite expensive. And this is something I want to move away from and try and make it cheap. So for me, compost is something that we add to the soil quite regularly. It's full of those nutrients, minerals, etc., that will just work with all the soil in the ground anyway. But we still need more. We still need more. In terms of liquid feed, so when my plants are young, I tend to use a seaweed feed as a liquid feed. That I find helps encourage good, strong roots. And then on our flowering plants, it's the tomato feed. I am trialing both the Boost and the All Grow as an all-purpose, all-round plant feed. Then for the solid feeds, we've got Grow More, which we tend to add. That's an all-purpose, all-round. That's more feed in the soil, so we will put it on dry into the soil. Blood, fish, and bone, which I tend to add to onions and brassicas. I've got a garlic feed. I've got bone meal. The list just goes on, and I think there's far too many to list. So let's have a look and see what everyone is saying. So Scott says, I don't use too many feeds, so I'm hoping I will learn lots tonight. I hope so too. That's what I want to find out as well. Dave Extreme says it was 17 degrees C the other day, but now turning chilly again. Yep. Ian McCragan, I always get his surname wrong. Ian McCragan has joined. Hello to you. And Richard Golden has joined. Hello all. Good evening to you. Stuart Jackson, I also have a wormery as well. I'm not allowed to use any chemicals at school, so I'm trying lots of different natural feeds. So the topic could not come at a better time. Excellent. So wormery, if you have a wormery, it produces a liquid feed as well, which is one of the reasons I love having a wormery as well. Now, we will get into our homemade plant feeds in just a moment. Digwell says, don't get those envy feeds on the foliage, drench the soil only. So that's a very good point, actually. Most feeds we really do want into the ground anyway, because that's where, covering the foliage in most feeds don't do plants any good. They need it at the roots, so we want it to get into the soil anyway. I say most because there are, and it gets really complicated when you start getting into it, there are foliar feeds that plants do absorb through the foliage. This is what I mean by, I feel that sometimes when we get into feeds and fertilizers, it can get incredibly complicated, and I'm trying to keep it simple. Turbo Stream says, my feeds are homemade composted, pelleted chickens, I think that means chicken manure, blood, fish and bone, and recently brought some liquid seaweed feed. Fantastic. So yeah, keeping it simple. But this is what I like to see, just keeping it simple. Jenny says, I like the natural grower as it's an all-rounder. I only feed pots. I don't feed in ground plants. I do concentrate on soil health more through chop and drop. Chop and drop, of course, where you're basically weeding or removing weeds and you just leave them to rot on the ground, which does kind of help. But again, I come back to the fact that as vegetables, when we grow vegetables, those plants absorbing the nutrients, the minerals from the soil, and then we're eating those plants. So we've got to replenish those nutrients and minerals from what we take away. Excuse me. Hargrave Gas. I mainly use blood, fish and bone, also chicken manure pellets and phosphorus occasionally for stuff indoors. So that's another one for blood, fish and bone and chicken manure pellets. Stuart Jackson says, I also use chicken pellets at home as I found this really good. Now, this brings me up. I received a question earlier today to throw out to everyone, actually. One of the things that this person, I won't mention her name, just to be on the safe side, but she's read or being told a lot at the moment are fruit trees or bushes need a high nitrogen plant feed at the moment, and what should we be using for a high nitrogen plant feed? For me, it was chicken manure pellets. I think that's the high nitrogen plant feed. But what about you? What do you use? Scott says, I use tomato feed and chicken manure pellets, but I find there's too much choice and therefore confusing. This is exactly the problem that I have. There is way too much choice. Does it make a difference as well? Does blood, fish and bone work better than grow more? Does it bone meal make much of a difference? Then you get dedicated potato fertilizers, garlic fertilizers, onion fertilizers, olive fertilizers. It does become a little bit of a minefield. Kate says, blood, fish and bone, chicken manure pellets and liquid seaweed, sorry. I've also used alpaca manure, which is great and a real smell. Again, alpaca manure, is that a cold manure, so you can put it straight on the plants? But most of my manures I add to my compost bin to produce compost, including my chicken waste. So it all goes into that and builds the compost up. Ideally, and this is one of my targets for this year, we're going to produce enough compost that we don't have to buy in, but we can mulch all our beds with compost and no dig without buying any in. Except for pots, of course. Chili Kate says, sat in the shed and I can see Envy seaweed feed, Maxi crop tomato feed, potato fertilizer, and chicken manure pellets. Also have a worry at home. So there you go. This is kind of my point, is that there's 4 in that shed. And potato fertilizer is obviously quite obvious. Tomato feed. I think the term tomato feed is a bit of a wrong one, because you don't just use it on tomatoes, you use it on any fruiting plants. Strawberries, courgettes, aubergines, peppers, chilies, they all benefit from a bit of tomato feed. Ian says, Miracle Grow for my flowers, grow more for my shrubs in the spring, and only seaweed for my veg, especially the runner beans. There we go. That's nice and simple, isn't it? Miracle Grow for the flowers, grow more for the shrubs, and in the spring, and seaweed for the veg. Nice and easy. But again, I come back to the tomato feed. Dermot Stream says, I tend to chuck a few chicken pellets in the planter now, then top dress as the season goes on with chicken pellets when I remember. Yeah, I've got to get hold of some chicken pellets soon, actually, because I am out. But I've got so many other feeds I just need using up as well. Andy Jones says, I've been using Envy seaweed extract for a while. Very good stuff. Yeah. I'm a big fan of seaweed extract or seaweed fertilizers. As I said, I use it. I mean, I mulch my asparagus with seaweed anyway, but I use seaweed for really it's getting some good, strong roots. So it's good for young plants. I know somebody out there has said that every time they feed, they add a very light dilution of seaweed feed every time they water, sorry, just because it is so good at producing good, strong roots. And if a plant's got good, strong roots, it's going to have good life. Dad says, good evening. Good evening, Dad. Digwell says, no compost for me, so I have to feed the soil. this is one of the things I love about this conversation that we have. I sit here and say what I do, as I said, trying to build enough compost. But as Digwell has proven, he can't have a compost bin on his allotment, so he has to feed the soil. And one of the things that always annoys me about gardeners is we say what we do, thinking everybody can garden exactly the same. What we do here, we find all these different challenges and work together to help each other out. Jenny says, prime example, have you tried chopping and dropping to Digwell for that? Ian says, no worries. Everyone gets my surname wrong. As I always say, Ian is just fine. Thank you. Stream. I also had leaf mold, but we had bad news the other week. The trust who delivers the leaves have new vans that are too big for the lane, so no more leaves. I'm gutted about that. Now, leaf mold generally is quite low in nutrients, as I understand it. It's good for seeds, but very low in nutrients. So, compost is better, but of course, it's a case of working with what you've got. Now, Nigel has came in with a great answer. The one question I asked is, why do we have liquid feeds and solid feeds? Liquid feeds for fast uptake, nitrogen, potash, balanced feeds, and use solid feeds for taking effect over a longer period. Yeah, I think that is kind of sums it up. The solid feeds break down into the soil, and then the plants will mine it out of the soil. The liquid feeds the plants get when they absorb straight out the soil. So it is for a fast uptake. That does make a lot of sense, but we do come back to the fact that we need to feed our soil as well. Dry fertilizers, bloodfish and bone, liquids, nettle tea and comfrey tea, and sometimes seaweed feed, plus saxon manure and garden compost. So yeah, another one for bloodfish and bone. Bloodfish and bone does seem to be very, very popular. Now, one of the problems I've had with bloodfish and bone, I use the stuff, so I'm not knocking it, but I've put it onto my soil down on the allotment lately. And what I noticed, I went down the allotment today, something has been digging at my soil. I suspect probably foxes or something, and they've smelt that bloodfish and bone, and they're thinking there's something in the soil, so they've been digging up, dug up a few of my potatoes. Luckily, they were okay, but it is just a little thing to remember with bloodfish and bone. It does attract some of the vermin. They'll probably get fed up quite soon, but it can have that effect. Digwell says, what I meant was the MV ones you showed actually say to avoid foliar contact. Too strong, I guess. Yeah, these ones, I think they do say that on the package. Yeah. Rob's allotment gun. I use blood, fish and bone, potato feed, onion and garlic feed, tomato feed, liquid sea feed, chili focus, CalMag, fish emulsion, potash, and some others. It is a real mind boggle. It is a real mind boggle. So I think where we're going to lead this conversation down to now. Have I got an answer to the question I asked earlier? The question I asked earlier, what would you recommend for high nitrogen fertilizer, a high nitrogen fertilizer? I'm going to have to skip a load of the comments, I'm afraid, but it seems like this is a conversation people really want to get into. Digwell asks a question: why do different manufacturers make different NPKs feeds for a particular veg? I.e., onion feed Marshalls 12, 11, 18, Kimpack 657, Alexa 9, 5, 19, 10, Medwin 6, 8, 15. They all can't be the best. So it is a good question. This is one of the things that I'm saying, that these feeds and fertilizers get very confusing, especially if you're a newbie gardener. And this is something I want to try and address a lot. Keep it simple is my entire mantra at the moment. NPK, it is often a number cited on a lot of the feeds and fertilizers that we use. It stands for nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. I think I've got those the right way around. And the three numbers, so for the Marshalls one, 12, 11, 18, stands for how much of each feed is in that order. So NPK, N being nitrogen would be 12, P being phosphorus being 11, and K being potassium being 18. I think I've got that the right way around. My chemistry is a little bit off today. And it just shows how much that is of each um, chemical, I guess is the right word. These are natural chemicals, though. They are naturally found in the soil. And nitrogen is good for strong foliage. One is good for strong, potassium is good for fruits. Phosphorus is good for strong roots. So you want higher potassium if you want tomato feed, for example. So it is very, very confusing, I've got to say, and it does become a bit of a problem. Turbic Swim says leaf mold is a good soil conditioner, so you should feed the soil in the long term, I hope. I think it will. It will certainly bring in the life, it'll bring in the worms, and that will help with a lot of the plants as well. Ian says, I always water any feed but blood, fish, and bone. Water it in, as yes, foxes and dogs do go for it. Yeah, they do indeed. I may order a drop of manure this autumn and fill my compost bays for the year. Highly recommend you do that anyway. Or manure is always needed on an allotment, isn't it? So Digler says high nitrogen urea 46.0.0. Yeah, go pee on it is something that could be good. I'm not going to recommend doing that though, but it is something you could do. For nitrogen, I would use a nettle feed, either in a tea or chop and dropped. Better still, both. Yeah. Nettle tea, just take some nettles, put them in a bit of water for a couple of weeks, drain off the liquid, and you've got a plant feed ready to go. Very nice and easy. Digwell says K is potassium. I thought it was. I'm trying to remember from my research. Anna Jones says, as a vegetarian, I couldn't bring myself to even touch blood, fish and bone or hoof and horn, never mind spread it on the garden. And this is actually a very valid point, same as vegan growers, of course. They're not going to want to use blood, fish and bone too. So what would be an alternative for blood, fish and bone? What would you recommend as an alternative to blood, fish and bone? Anna Jones says, grass clippings is very good for nitrogen. I've been cutting the grass on the allotment today, used the grass clippings as a mulch. Could you make a feed out of grass clippings? It would be an interesting question. In an ideal world, we would all have big compost bays and make loads of compost like Charles Dowding, but not many people can make as much as him. This is something we're trying to do this year, is make enough compost. It's not so much about having big enough bays. I mean, it does help. It's more about having enough material to compost down is the real challenge, I think. I try and compost everything, but we try if easier. Stu Jackson says, if I want to use natural fertilizer, what would you recommend for potatoes and root veg? Thank you. Potatoes and root veg, what would I recommend for those? I would probably do a manure feed. So you get a sack of manure, put it into a water butt of water for a couple of weeks, and then use the liquid that comes out of that. That would be my thoughts, but I'll throw that out there. Any natural or homemade fertilizers that you can recommend for potatoes and root veg? Urea is not urine. Yes, sorry, I was being a bit flippant. Sorry, I slapped my wrist. What have we got? Nigel says, I tend to choose the feed based on what element I want to change. Element, fantastic. So that's the word I was looking for. Talk about nitrogen, etc. Yeah, what element you want to change. And as it comes back to potassium being good for flowering plants, so you want to add more potash, more potassium if you want good tomatoes. Brassicas thrive on high nitrogen beds, so they need more nitrogen and so on. And that is kind of the crux of the subject, isn't it? Where we're trying to get down to these feeds and fertilizers. Just trying to make it simple, though. Just remember that. Don't forget comfrey tea. Comfrey tea, yeah. Comfrey tea, of course, is great. But again, if you haven't got a comfrey plant on your allotment, you're missing out. You take some comfrey, pot them in a bucket with water, and it's a very good high potassium comfrey liquid feed. Comfrey, its roots actually go down really low. It's a dynamic accumulator, so it will mine potassium for lower down in the soil and bring it up in its leaves. That's how it kind of works. Idaho Garden Girls joined, saying hello to myself and everyone. Good evening to you. Owen says granulated seaweed. I've been looking at granulated seaweed, actually, funny enough, and I think that's a good one to buy. Is that all you use? Is that the only fertilizer you use, though? Bethan says, evening all. Sorry I'm late. I have been in the garden. Don't blame you. Don't blame you. It's a lovely day, isn't it, for gardening? What have we got? Beddoes has joined. I mainly use Corporation Pop. Corporation Pop. What's that? What's that? Nigel, be it bloodfish and bone alternatives, wood ash and liquid seaweed. Now we're getting into an element with the wood ash. Nobody's actually mentioned wood ash yet. Something we do have here at home is open fireplaces, and we do try and spread some of the ashes on the beds as well. Again, very good for potassium. That's actually where the term potash comes from, but it's got to be wood. It can't be coal. It can't be anything like that. It needs to be wood, and that is full of potassium. And it needs to be untreated wood and things like that that make it very, very complicated in many ways. Nigel says for potatoes, woods, rhubarb, leaves. Woods. Add a bit more to that, could you, Nigel? Rhubarb leaves, again, taking rhubarb leaves and making a liquid feed in the same way we spoke about comfrey and nettles, just in a bucket of water. But woods, what do you mean by woods? What have we got? Digwell says calcified seaweed for potassium as a natural feed. That does remind me, yes, Jersey Royals, the old Jersey Royal, the Jersey farmers used to say that the key to them producing such good potatoes was the fact they would use seaweed from the beaches and horse manure on their soils. So obviously seaweed is going to be a good one for potatoes too. A good answer to that. Kate says, I'm going to try and test my soil soon to see which end of the scale it sits so I can feed accordingly. Yeah, I mean, doing soil tests are great if you've got the right kit and you can find out just how much of what is needed. But again, it's about working what plants you need, what plants are needed in that particular bed to find out what is needed for that. Jenny says, I grew potatoes in a potato tower last summer. I used grass clippings and pulled nettles instead of straw to build the levels. Worked well and slowly rotted to feed the soil. Yeah, fantastic. Grass clippings, grass clippings are something I use a lot of, and they're what I call the unsung heroes in many ways. Nigel says, horse manure in a sack soaking in water is a good liquid feed as well. Fantastic. Digwell says, making compost tea from the weed that is prevalent in your area is pulled all the nutrients for you. For him, it's Docs. Again, this comes back to what I was saying about vegetables. When we eat our vegetables, we're taking away those nutrients, those minerals from the soil, and they become in us. So if you've got weeds growing a lot in your area, for me, I've got a lot of couch grass on my allotment, which tells me that there's a lot of nitrogen in the soil because couch grass loves nitrogen. But all the time those plants are absorbing that and taking in those nutrients and into themselves, we need that to replenish the soil as well. So good things there. Good thinking there. Allotted Chef, apparently aquarium water is a fantastic fertilizer. Yes, I used to have fish tanks, and yes, we used to, when we cleaned out the fish tank, the water we took out, we did use to feed our garden as well. And it was a very, very good feed and fertilizer. It's got all that fish poop in it, so it was very good at that. I mean, I'm being very, very brief with this because it's a topic that everyone seems to be really into tonight. So, but yeah, aquarium water, again, it's something if you've got an aquarium, you might as well use it. Jenny says, with manure, I know we all think about pesticides in it, but I've been reading about traces of worm, etc. It is a very good point. Yes, some horse manures are known to have that word that I can never pronounce. I'm going to give it a try. anemoprophylids, something like that. Uh, it it can be found in horse manure because the grass that they graze on have been sprayed with it. It's a broadleaf weed killer, and that can be a bit of a problem for sometimes. But there are sometimes wormers found in in these manures, and what other things can be found? Um, um, uh, Medication, things like that as well. It's difficult to know what to do for the best now, I'll be honest with you. I personally am not too worried. Uh, Ian Bennett says you're not old enough. Corporation pop is what comes out the tap. So water, basically. Excellent, excellent. What have we got? What have we got? Nigel says potato feeds, wood ash and rhubarb leaves. Wood ash and rhubarb leaves for potato feeds. Excellent. Owen says I use blood, fish and bone, wood ash, grow more granulated seaweed, and Angus potato fertilizer. Fantastic. Again, it just end up with having so many in the cupboard, don't we, for all these plant feeds? So let's break this down to one question then. Let's say you were just starting out as a brand new gardener. What one plant feed would you tell a new gardener that they absolutely need? What one plant feed would you say that they have to have? I would probably say liquid seaweed for me. If I kind of feel if you're able to produce enough compost, you don't need to buy in any other feed for the soil. But liquid seaweed is a good one, I think, to add. But what do you think? What do you think to that? Digwell says aminopyralid. Anemopyralid. That's the word I can never pronounce. I'll always get that wrong. Kate says, I have a axolotl tank. I wonder if that water works. Well, try it out. When you clean out I can never remember his name or her name off the top of my head. I've seen the pictures. When you clean out that water, feed a plant with it and see how well it gets on. Turbo Stream says, I mulch my home borders with grass clippings now, plus add to the compost bin. I'm a big fan of grass clippings. I mulch on the allotment with grass clippings. I was mulching my brassicas today with grass clippings. Just a fantastic thing to use. I mean, it does divert it away from the compost bin, but it helps grow the plants at the same time. Nigel says 6x fibrous fertilizer is a good alternative to storing / using horse manure. That's a good idea, isn't it? Bethan says, do you just place the rhubarb leaves on top of the potato area? Good question. Good question. Do you just place the rhubarb leaves on top of the potato area? Digwell says, is it illegal to allow anything treated? It is illegal to allow anything treated with anemopyralids to leave the farm. If you have it, report it to Corvetta for them to pass on to HS&E. Fantastic, fantastic. On that question, I just had a thought about Bethan asking placing rhubarb leaves on top of potato areas. I once tried placing my rhubarb leaves on top of my rhubarb area because I read a lot of people were saying it to reduce the weeds around the rhubarb. But I noticed my rhubarbs didn't like it very much. They started discoloring, so I moved them away and I never had a problem since. I don't know what was going on there, but I won't do that again. Hargrave Gas says cow manure is safer than the horse manure as the multiple stomachs cows have filter out more of the nasty pesticides and stuff it's sprayed on what they eat. Yeah, I think if we can get cow manure, for some reason, horse manure seems to be the one that everybody or we tend to go for. I think because it's easier to get hold of. But I would suspect there's probably more chance of being able to get hold of cow manure than there is horse manure. I think it's just, I personally believe we use horse manure from the days when we used to have horse and carts. So everybody had horse manure like we have other pets, and that was just used for that because it was available. But cow manure is safer and better, I believe. My one feed, tomato feed, says Kate. Stuart says, if the new gardener needed fertilizer, I would tell him about the wormery. It helps you with veg waste as well. You know what? That's not a bad tip, actually. The wormery juice, as well as getting compost, that's actually a very good answer, I have to say. 6x is good, says Digwell. For new gardeners, well-watered cow manure or off-the-shelf liquid seaweed and grow more. So another one for liquid seaweed there and grow more. There we go. I use my rhubarb leaves as a layer in my compost bins. Yeah, me too now. Me too. What else have we got? Digwell says they reported a contaminated B&Q compost to HSE for me. There we go. Excellent. Richard, Rob's Allotment Gardens says, Richard, Duncan at Coastal Gardens now Northwest has fish and he uses the water to water his plants at home. Yeah, I used to do that when I had fish as well. I used to use that water to water my plants. It can be a little bit smelly. I wouldn't recommend it on house plants, but it was full of a lot of nutrients. It did really seem to boost a lot of our plants up as well. Jenny says, I can get loads of Ida manure. I have used it and loved it. I know farmers moving away from using wormers as it made me think what is used. I mean, it's a difficult one when we start getting into manures and wormers and stuff like that. When we get into these conversations, I always sort of say I'm not a scientist. I don't look at these things under a microscope, so I never really know what is going on. But we're open to suggestions and ideas on that one. Now, let's park this conversation just for a little moment because we're going to go to this week's Sow Along quickly. So this week, the Sow Along is a courgette. So hopefully you're all going to go and sow some courgettes as well. Let's have a look at the video. Well, this week's mission was to find some to make some biodegradable pots for things that don't like our root disturbance. So one of the best examples, of course, parsnip. Now, I had lots of different ideas of things we could do. We could make some newspaper pots, which I've done in the past. We don't have newspapers, so I couldn't quite do that. The other idea I had was paper mache, using, again, strips of newspaper, which I don't have, to form a type of glue made of flour and water to form a load of pots. Again, I don't have newspapers, so I couldn't do that. But I came up with a couple of other options. But don't forget, if you've got any ideas, let us know in the comments what your ideas are. So we've got two things that we are going to use. The first one is an egg tray. I don't buy eggs in, so we were lucky to actually be able to have this. And I thought, you know what, that's probably a good idea. They'll break apart easy when wet, and we can put them straight in the ground where they should biodegrade. They are just cardboard after all. And the second idea I got are these toilet roll inners. In fact, one's a kitchen roll that I've cut in half. I've just filled them up with compost, and we will see, and we'll sow some seeds into them and see how we get on. So I'm sowing into these some parsnip seeds. I'm just going to do 2 parsnip seeds for each pot. That way, if we can always pick out the strongest, or discard, if I get my words out, that is, discard the weakest plant if they both germinate. Parsnip seeds, of course, being quite a delicate seed and don't really need burying too deeply. In fact, we'll put them on the surface to see how they get on. Parsnips, of course, being one of those that a lot of people do have difficulties with sowing. Anyway, I think that is mission completed. There's 2 things here that I could use and ideas for some other things. I've stuck with the principle, keep it simple, because I think that is a good rule to stick by. But as I said, if you've got any ideas of other suggestions, let us know in the comments of what you would make some biodegradable pots out of. Right, that wasn't a sow along. I've labelled them up incorrectly. That was the mission. The mission was to create some biodegradable pots that we can just grow, something like that don't like disturbing, and just pop those straight in the ground. And I had egg cartons, newspaper, or toilet rolls. I thought about doing paper mache things. I thought about doing everything else. We don't have newspaper, so that didn't happen. But inspired by that, Scott's actually made a video with some egg cartons that he's got from work. Did it slightly differently to me, but let's see what he done. There we go. Thank you very much for that, Scott. I think we said great minds think alike sometime using these egg trays. Of course, that's a larger tray than what I had, but it's biodegradable at the end of the day. We're going to use these quite often. I forgot to add, I've actually got some biodegradable pots. I didn't make them, so I didn't count those in. But there's things to think about, isn't it? What would you use? What could you use for biodegradable pots? And on that note, I need a mission for next week, a challenge, something you can set me for next week's live. Get your thinking caps on, and I will see what we've got. Kate says, I've got a log burner now. What would I use the ash for? So you can add the ash to your compost bin, and it helps sweeten the compost. You can add it to tomatoes. You need to keep it dry until you use it. But you can add it to your tomatoes as like a potash, a potassium feed. Add it to potatoes as well. They look quite like that. Any flowering plants would love it. Just sprinkle it around the base in the middle when it's dry, and let it water in. What else could you use it for? Well, there's quite a few things, I think. We'll see what anybody else comes up with as well. In fact, Rob also said potatoes as well. Wood ash is great for dressing an onion bed, says Nigel too. Nicola's joined. Sorry I'm late. Been fighting brambles. I saw the picture in the group. Actually, you've been busy, very busy. No probs, says Wayne and his garden. Welcome along, Wayne. Digwell says some posh bog roll tubes have a white plastic coating inside them. I don't see the point in spending the loads of money on bog roll, to be honest with you. I will be polite, but I don't see the point in spending loads of money just to do what they're intended to do and flush it down the toilet. That's my attitude. Richard Ballycillion, says, for the vegetarian growers, can they use the various green manures available for sowing? Green manures, that's a very good point, actually. We haven't really touched on. Green manures can be used for adding nitrogen or adding things to the soil, a feed fertilizer. So a good example would be field beans. They absorb nitrogen in through the air, and they pot it down into the soil, provided you do it in the right time. So it could be used. Yes, green manures can be used. Green manures have lots of different advantages depending on what green manure it is. Do your research is what I would say on that. Idaho says, I'm wondering about using all the shredded paper from the office. Supposedly they only use soy-based ink. Seems like that shredded paper could make compost. Or yeah, I use, to be honest, most inks now are vegetable based, so I see no problem with using them. The only things to be careful are the plastic coated cardboard, because that might be a bit of a problem. What have we got? Nicholas says, good job I used cheap loo roll. Izel, rough side or smooth side. And Izel is not white on the inside. What's Izel? What's Izel? Izel carbolic soap. I have no idea what you're talking about. No idea. Scott says holes, not holes. Typo. Yeah, I noticed that as well. We all do it. We all do it. Great video, Scott. Great idea, Scott. Thanks for that. Thanks for the idea, Scott. Digger says, how about a soil blocker? Make your own plugs. That was another option. I don't have a soil blocker making machine, but I've seen a lot of people sort of say you spend a lot of time just getting the mixes right. And see what we can do. Jenny says, get challenged for next week. Gather the army and head to my allotment to sort it out. I wish. It's a shame you're so far away. Otherwise, I would try and help. Yeah, I can't remember exactly where you are, but I know you're not local to me. Lottie Chef, what's the people's thought on using urine as a natural fertilizer? Good question. Good question. I mean, it's not a very pleasant thing to talk about sometimes, is it? But when I'm on the allotment, we don't have toilets on the allotment, so I have no choice but to go where I can. So I tend to pee on my compost bins, which I see is adding to the beds. It is a natural fertilizer, but I don't see a problem with it. The trouble I feel at the moment is it's when it goes down the toilet, it's then treated and then it becomes difficult to use and what have you. But it is a natural product, agreed. Great idea with a soil blocker, provided the soil moisture is correct. That's my thinking as well. I've not used them, so I've not really had any experience. Jenny says, I've been looking at soil block, but my hands are too weak to press them out. I've been thinking on how to adapt them. Yeah, I've been thinking of. I don't know what to suggest on that. I'll be honest. Isel is toilet roll from the 60s, like wiping on a broken bottle. It's not. We used to have this toilet paper. This is a really weird discussion, isn't it? We used to have this toilet paper at school that was like grease paper. It's not that stuff you're talking about, is it? Let me know. Let me know. Let me know. Tyro Stream says Richard is too young to have used Isel toilet paper, the stuff of nightmares. Never heard of it. It's like baking parchment, Richard. Eek. It sounds like the stuff we had at school. That was like greaseproof paper. Urine should be used undiluted as a fertilizer because it's too concentrated in pure form and would harm the plants. The only exception, the lawn. Unless you've got a dog, of course, then it does damage the lawn. Andrew Noyce has joined. Sorry, evening all. Sorry to have missed so much. Andrew, what feeds and fertilizers do you use? Kate says, is it true only male pee deters foxes? Good question. Does male pee deter foxes? Let us know. Isel is great to use as tracing paper. Isel, yes, like thin tracing paper. I think I remember the stuff. I think I do remember the stuff. It was like, no, I'm not going to get into it. I'm not going to get into it. Jenny says, I remember being sent to the loos for that tracing paper, loo rolling lies. Oh, dear. Toby Slim says, they say adding urine to the compost heap helps. That's why when I have to go, I go on my compost heaps, only on the allotment at home. I don't think our neighbours would quite like seeing that. Idaho says the toilet paper we had at school came out of a dispenser, little rough squares, miserable stuff. Yeah, it sounds like the stuff I seem to remember from school. Scott says, never heard of soil blocks. Are they like the coir discs that you sow into? Not quite. Not quite. I'm trying to bring the subject back. So the soil blocks, as I recall, is you would buy this block maker, you fill it up with compost, and it's like a press, and it would press the compost into square blocks that you could just then directly sow into. That's my understanding. It's like a press. The coir discs are a bit different, but another alternative, I guess you could say as well. Tapping Stream says this subject is going down the pan. It was a difficult subject to head back onto. Andrew, I feel sorry for anybody who joined into that conversation or suddenly tuned into the conversation about toilet roll, of course. Andrew says, for vegetables, I use homemade stinging nettle tea, 1 part to 10 parts water, but for fruits tree, I use my homemade comfrey tea, same proportions. Jenny says, does anyone use wall pots? We've got some just here, funnily enough. I've got a few of them. All they are, they're basically socks. Basically, let's get this to focus. They're socks that you can sort of use for your plants. I've got a few of these, actually. What I would say, I got, when I was at Gardeners World Live last year, it was the white ones. They've got a different change to them with the grey ones, but the white ones, when I was Gardeners World, they have a stand where you can take your plants that you've brought and they take the plastic pot off and they pot them into a better pot that is biodegradable, etc., etc. I didn't think about the wall pots. I should have used those as a biodegradable pot. But the white ones, what I found, unlike the plastic, and when I was trying to transport it home, it wasn't very good for transporting. I think they'll be fine if you're not moving around, and we're going to have to use those wall pots. But for transporting, they weren't quite as good. I should make a bit more of a display out of them, shouldn't I? Somehow. Yeah. Weed compost tea. Do you use it like nettles or banana skins? Thank you. So do you use it? Do you use weed compost tea and like your nettles or banana skins? So this kind of feels. I think we should start heading down the next conversation that I want to discuss. Actually, bringing back the feeds and fertilizers. Homemade feeds and fertilizers. We touched upon it. I want to find out from you, what homemade feeds and fertilizers do you use and how do you make them? Let us know in the comments as always. Turbo Stream says, imagine turning in halfway through this stream wondering what the hell. I don't think you have to turn in halfway through. You probably always think, what the hell? Jenny says, it won't be long before the melon comments start. Talking of melons, has anyone sown their melons? Yes. I sowed them last week. We're doing quite well with melons. Yeah, here's my answer to that. I've sown some melons. Muddy Boot says, used wool pots and fibre bags, but I found out they dried very quickly. Yeah, I mean, the white ones I had last year, I did find they were in the shed, of course. They deteriorated a little bit. So they're good. They are good. I like the fact that wool is being used a bit more, but I would say they don't quite have the same transportability as plastic in some ways, is my only concern. Digwell says, yes, I'm abreast of the situation, bringing up the melons. Turbo Stream says, on a local radio phone in, the garden expert recommends saving a load of used tea bags and making a liquid feed like compost tea. I've not heard of that one, but it does remind me, my auntie, she used to make a pot of tea and she used to throw the tea leaves, the used tea leaves, into this bed in her garden. That always did grow away well, so there might be something in it. Digwell says the botanic ones from the press event are rubbish. I've got some of those as well. I've got a huge box of them. Yeah, I know what you mean. Terror Stream, oh my god, melon puns alert. Yeah, let's see what happens. I knew you would, Digwell. Nigel says, yes, I got a pair in the propagator, a pair of melons. Melon started germinating today, says Ballycillian. What else have we got? Idaho says, my season is just started. I'm starting to sow tomatoes indoors, under lights, and on heat. Fantastic. It does, I've got to say, it does feel at the moment that this season has really just got underway in the last week or so. I do feel a bit more confident that we're over the worst of the weather here, and we can start really planting on and sowing out our seeds. Bethan's Kitchen and Garden. I make comfrey tea and nettle tea. I asked, what home feeds do you use? Comfrey tea and nettle tea. I fill a large tub, such as an old FB&B plastic tub. Oh, fish, blood and bone, and fill it up with nettles. Place a bick on the nettles and then fill it up to the top with water. It stinks though. It does stink, doesn't it? So, on that note, yeah, my homemade plant feeds. I do have the wormery, which produces a beautiful home liquid that we use quite often. It used to be the only plant feed I used to use, if I'm honest with you. I hate waste, and when I get sent plant feeds, I feel I have to use them. There was bokashi. I do bokashi as well, and that produces this liquid, which actually is very good as a drain cleaner, but it can also be very good as plant feed. Again, it's like a liquid feed produced by the composting process. The other, I've made a comfrey feed down on the allotment. I've got this feed maker, and it's basically, it's got a cage in it that you fill up with your plants. You then put it into the bucket, fill the bucket up with water, and the cage you can move up and down to agitate, and then it has a tap on the bottom of the bucket as well. That produces some good feed, which I use for comfrey feed mostly. But I've also found actually, when it comes to comfrey, using comfrey as a mulch can actually work better, because it just seeps into the soil and you don't get that smell either. What have we got? So Nigel says he's a good guy. Oh, talking about the radio presenter. Anne Wright says, any idea of approximate NPK of worm juice? You know, that's a question I've often wondered myself when it comes to worm juice. I have no idea. I have no idea what the NPK, but I would have thought it would vary depending on what's gone in to the mix. So I think it's one that cannot really be worked out. But I could be wrong. Digwell says, no mention of biochar yet. I spread mine on a few beds today. It took 2 weeks to inoculate it. Biochar, yeah. I mean, biochar, when put as a feed or fertilizer, it's more of an additive, but it acts like a sponge and holds on to a lot more of the nutrients. I use it quite often, actually. I've run out. I've got to get some more biochar at some point to really work on that. But biochar, little bits of charcoal, basically, that you add into your mixes, and it helps, a bit like perlite as well, for that matter, hold on to water, nutrients, and things like that. Stu Jackson says, no melons, but I do have cucumbers, tomatoes, and courgettes up. My homemade plant food is banana feed, wormery, and now the stinging nettles are grown. I will make some nettle feed. How do you go about making all these? How do you go about making all these, Stuart? Especially with the kids at school, I think that might be a good one to share. Nigel says, worm juice has more micronutrients than direct NPK. The micronutrients and minerals are something we haven't really touched upon with feeds and fertilizers. Often as gardeners, we concentrate on the NPK because they're the three main elements that we need to worry about. But micronutrients there's so many in the soil that are also needed. In fact, Digwell has come back with worm castings are rich in micronutrients containing iron, sulfur, magnesium, zinc, copper, calcium. They also provide macronutrients and have an NPK ratio of 100 to 553. So it does depend. But it's more all that other stuff as well, isn't it? All those micro and macronutrients that is often forgotten about. Anna Jones says, anyone ever used volcanic rock dust to remineralize their gardens? Some YouTubers swear by it. Others say it's just a silly myth and it does nothing. Volcanic rock dust, that's an interesting one. Lava Light is something that a company I know of, and there are a lot of people are singing their praises. I will admit that. But I've never actually used it, so I don't know. The only thing I would say, I can't remember if it's perlite or vermiculite. I think it's perlite that is produced in volcanic areas or by volcanoes. and we often add that to our mixes as well. But that acts as more like a sponge. I think it is perlite that is found in for volcanic areas. Um, but on that note, something I was sent a few years ago, and I'm not technically allowed to recommend this because it hasn't been tested. So please do take what I say with a pinch of salt. But it was stuff called brick dust. Now, I used this as a bit of an experiment, and it really did have some really good results. Brick, I think, is pretty much red clay, isn't it? And it just the dust off that, added in with our seedling mixes and stuff like that, did seem to grow a very good root system. But it hasn't officially been suggested it is usable for gardening. So you've got to take what I say with a pinch of salt there. Basically, I don't want to get in trouble if you use it, and I'm not recommending the use of it. I'm just saying I had some good results with it. Banana feed is one banana skin chopped up and placed in 2 litres of water. Leave for an hour, then half a cup into the watering can. Do you leave the banana skin in there for more than an hour, or just the hour that you say? Let me know. Let me know. Digwell says, I've used it, but I cannot confirm it is any good as I applied it everywhere. It does get a bit difficult to try and experiment sometimes with all these things. Rob says, I'm not a big fan of it, talking about this volcano dust. Just go to a local quarry and get quarry dust. There we go. Riemann rock dust is extremely slow release, but does contain lots of trace elements. It is advertised as being added to some commercial composts. There we go. Interesting stuff, isn't it? Nettle tea is pick full a bucket of 3/4. Nettle tea is pick full a bucket up, pick the nettles, fill a bucket up with 3/4 with the leaves, then fill with water and stand for a good few days. And again, mix in with your watering can. Jenny says a couple of buckets of nettles into a bit of water, roots as well. It stinks. Smelly free, just nettles and a large stone on top of a bucket with a tap. Concentrate feed comes out. Good idea. Good idea. Scott says, I've read before that the water left over from cooking rice, pasta, and potatoes can be used as a feed. I've not heard of that one. Not heard of that one at all. I usually use I usually have to make. I use cooking water for stocks when we have if we have a roast or something. We've got the potatoes. I use the water from that to add to the bones to make our or even vegetables for that matter, our stocks. I've not heard about using it in the garden. Would be an idea. Digwell says, I use a few feeds from a company called S. Shellac. Loads of micronutrients. Not only Jules says, I use 200-litre blue barrels to soak comfrey, nettles, and horse manure. So this is another problem that I've just thought of as we're talking about this. On my allotment, we're only allowed 2 water butts per allotment. So if I was to do the horse manure or the nettles and anything else, I would soon run out of water butts. Now, that being said, I'm pretty much moving away from having water butts on the allotment because I hardly ever use them. So perhaps we could do that anyway. Got something to think about there. Remin is very, very slow release. I've never heard of it before, so I'm going to take you and Nigel's word on that. Stuart Jackson, you can leave it for more than an hour, talking about the banana skins, but as the lesson is only 2 hours, we try to use what the children have made each lesson. I see. Good stuff. What are these homemade feeds good for? Like you said, bananas. I've no comfrey and things like that. Let me know. Just quickly, Belly Soon says the warm water after boiling potatoes is a great weed killer. That's a good point. Just like boiling a kettle, that little bit of water, that little bit of hot water, great for killing weeds. If it has fertilizing, then is it technically a water butt? Pull it to people who are only walking around and seeing what is done. That's all I would say. Then put yourself in those shoes. I've got 5 barrels and 7 wheelie bins on my plot. You lucky person. I used to, but not allowed it anymore. Beer making buckets work well as well. And Remin is the volcanic rock dust you mentioned. Oh, fantastic. I've not heard of it myself, so this is an interesting one for me. Right, now, I am going to put the right video up this time. The time is really flying by quite quickly, but this is the sew-along, the courgette sew-along for this week. Right, guys, in our old shed, where we're going to sow some seeds today, and today we're sowing courgettes, and this is, of course, this week's sew-along. Courgette is one of those plants that I grow quite a few of. I think everybody does grow it, but it's always one that we end up with too many, don't we? And we never really know what to do with courgettes. We'll put that to one side for the moment. Let's just get on and sow these seeds. Now, courgettes are pretty fast growing seedlings and they're pretty big, so I'm sowing them in these big trays. I've actually filled this up with multi-purpose compost from Heart of Eden. And I spoke about compost on this week's podcast. The smell of this is absolutely amazing. Really good high quality compost, I've got to say. I'm genuinely quite pleased with the quality of these composts. I don't know if anybody has a favourite brand of compost that they can share, but I highly do recommend this Heart of Eden at the moment. Now, the seeds themselves, courgette seeds are pretty large. I mean, you can handle these quite comfortably. They're that big. So I call them as what we need to get a couple of centimetres deep. And all I tend to do with these courgette seeds is just push them into the ground like so. And we're going to repeat that until we have sown all of them. Now, courgettes are, as I said, they are the one plant that every gardener I know will grow them, and they quite often end up complaining that they have too many courgettes to eat. One of the recommended techniques that I've read about this is to only grow 2 courgettes, but personally I think there's plenty of scope for more. These are always a plant that you can fit in where you have some spare space. They're not fussy about where they grow, as long as they get plenty of sunlight and plenty of nutrition. But you can put them in with brassicas or in with sweet corn or anything like that. There's plenty of scope for things that we can do with these. But I do try to grow more than 2. Excess, of course, we can always freeze in our freezers or turn into pickles and things like that. I personally believe there's no such thing as too many. Now, we are going to place these courgette seeds in our heated propagator once we've sown them all, and they should germinate within, I reckon, a week, depending on how good the seed quality is. Maybe 2 weeks, but we will keep an eye on it and see what goes on. Once they've germinated, we do need to keep them a bit warm. They are a tender plant, so they're not going to be able to go out until after the last frost, which for me will be about mid-May. Because these are quick growing, that's why I tend to sow them between mid-April and May. Just because they do grow quick and they do take up a lot of space. But keep them warm, plant them out in mid-May. Pretty much leave them to their own devices. They do benefit from a bit of tomato feed every now and then, but on a whole, they can just be left to their own devices. And then we would just see how they get on. And then harvest the courgettes as required. As long as they're pollinated, they are pretty easy. I would say these are one of the easiest plants to grow, so I can't really go into too much more detail about them. But get the idea. Now, if you are after any updates from our latest sow-alongs. So we sowed last week the gherkins. They're showing no signs of life just yet. Before that, it's a dragon's egg cucumber, which are growing incredibly well, I have to say. We have got, before that, the cauliflowers, which have been munched by slugs and snails. We have the cabbages from before that, also being eaten, but they do seem to be coping a little bit better. We've got the Zephyr F1 summer squash. They are growing really, really well. I think it's going to be soon when we start potting those up. Trying to think what else we've sown. Peas as well. Peas, unfortunately, have been munched by slugs and snails. Slugs and snails this year are being a real problem for us, but we seem to be slowly winning the battle. Right, I'm going to go get these in the heated propagator and I'll send you back to the studio. Indeed, that is our courgette seeds, or some of our courgette seeds sown for this week. We will be sowing many, many more courgette seeds over the coming weeks, just because I like to mix them up. I can always find homes for courgettes, and we can always eat them as well in various things. As I said, courgettes are something that a lot of people have trouble trying to use up, but I think they are delicious. Anybody got any tips on growing courgettes? Let us know in the comments. Nigel says Remin was at the Garden Press event about 3 years ago. Same stand as Agrarian. Where are they? I can't. Agrarian. I can't even remember Agrarian being there, to be honest. Not Glee. They weren't at Glee. To be fair, 3 years ago was a bit of a weird time, wasn't it? And right, comfrey and nettles better made into concentrate and dilute 20-1. Less smelly and more accurate dilution. Plus, can make concentrate in a drain pipe with a bottle under to catch the juice. Yeah, there's quite a few things we can do, isn't it? It's all good stuff. Stuart Jackson says, just a reminder, Richard, please do, everyone. Give us a like, give us a thumbs up, give us a follow and a subscribe. We'd really, really appreciate it. Plus, it gets the algorithms working for us. I should have said this at the beginning as well. Rob says, the best courgettes I have ever grown was a volunteer on my compost bin. Yeah, same as pumpkins. I think they thrive when grown in compost bins. That's something I try and do every year. Stuart Jackson says, thanks for the courgette seeds this month. I kept 3 for us, then sold the rest for charity this week. I don't think I did courgettes this month. If talking about the supporters club, there was melons, cucumbers, cumin, pumpkins, French beans, and what was the other one? French beans, pumpkins, parsnips, of course. Courgettes are next month. Yeah. Bethan says, I grew 2 of mine in my manure heap last year and they did really well. Yeah. Always grow some pumpkins at least in the compost bins as well. So big fan of that. Big fan. Toby Stream, I've just checked my courgettes, just started to show through. Fantastic. Agralian. I can't remember seeing them at Garden Press event, I'll be honest, but I remember seeing them at Glee. I'll try to get them to see him again. Digwell says, have a look into a thing called Liebig's barrel. If a mineral is too low from a plant, then there is no point adding the others. E.g., low magnesium, not point adding NPK. Good theory. Yeah, all these minerals, not everything else has to work. It's all about feeding the soil, getting those nitrogen and stuff in the soil. I'm a big believer in that we should be feeding the soil. We should be adding plenty of food to the soil because that's where the plants need it. And looking after the soil should be a key thing. As vegetable gardens, as I said earlier, we tend to eat that food and take it away with us. So we never know what's going on. Agralian make Riemann. Agrelin make Riemann. Yeah, I don't remember seeing them, so I take your word on that. Stuart Jackson, sorry, it was melons this week, £2 each bonus. There you go, selling your new melon seeds for £2. We all like a good melon, don't we? Stream, I also sowed this week's peas, parsnip, beetroot, cauliflower, butternut squash. Yeah, we've got lots and lots of things to do. My peas have been decimated, but we sow more and so on and so on. As a follow-on to Digwell, no one has mentioned soil testing. Somebody did mention soil testing earlier, actually. I think it was Kate, if I remember correctly. She mentioned soil testing her soil. But soil testing is saying the kits aren't really that expensive, but they can test the soil for what nutrients, what minerals are in your soil. I had a company on the podcast many years ago now whose business was to test soil. One of the things that came up was how people with arsenic in their soil, for example. I know that's something that Nicola suffers with. These are all the things that can sharpen those sort of soil tests. Um, has anybody done a soil test like that, though? Has anybody actually done a soil test to find out what is in their soil? Plus, the sprouts of spring onion in my outdoor seed bed was sown. Digwell says, watch Kiss the Ground, narrated by Woodley Harrelson. A very good info film. Excuse me. Excuse me. Yeah. Excuse me. Sorry. Yeah, Kiss the Ground. Very good film, actually. I really enjoyed that. It's all about how basically how we could be looking after the soil and making our world a better place just by composting. That's the key thing. We use compost, we grow better plants, and we get better results. Turbo Stream says, I haven't done a soil test. Worth doing. It is worth doing. Nicholas says, my Vitamix blender promotes use of grinding the bones of chickens and then use in the garden, same as bone meal. There you go, making your own bone meal. Something I've not really thought of, but good show. Good shout. Digwell says, I've done the basics, NPK and pH test. I've done pH tests. First thing I ever do. But NPK should be something we looked at as well. The show, not to be sneezed at, sorry. I try not to sneeze. I have a kit and one of those pH meters, so no excuse. Be interested to see what results you get, though, is all I would say. Digwell says, need to go wipe my face. All wet. Sorry about that. I tried not to. Stuart Jackson, we do soil test at school, but we do it the old way, jam jar and water. Does that tell you what nutrients are, though? I mean, again, at school it's very different, isn't it? Nicholas says, I now have not only chicken and duck poo, but horse and pig for my compost. Yay. Living a dream. Living a dream, I've got to say. I mean, why not? If you've got animals, use that manure. Again, Kiss the Ground comes into it. Nigel says, I do a soil test about every 3 years using test tubes and colour comparison. Does very much. Doesn't or does very much. That should be. Right, guys. So for next week's sow along, I'm going to sow some radish because I need to sow some radish, and I quite like radish. I don't know if anybody else likes radish, but I like them. But I do need a mission for next week, a challenge, something you can really challenge me to do. And I'm in the mood for something really, really big, really, really good. Not saying that all the others haven't been good, but this is your chance to really challenge me. Stuart says, I do have a soil testing kit in my greenhouse. It's been there for at least 3 years. Go use it. Go use it, because you might find that all these nutrients you add into your soil you don't need. I think that's a good way of thinking about it. It tells you what you will need and what you may need, and compared to what you have. Just thinking out loud here. Just thinking out loud here. Right, Bethan actually, well, I remember as well, Bethan sent me a picture of her harvest for this week. And here it is. There's carrots, spring onions, lettuce leaves, broccoli, purple sprouting broccoli, rhubarb, parsnips. Lots of good stuff there. She did say she was having to clear out of one of her beds, so everything came up, and that is something to think about. And that's why there's so much. But here we are in the hungry gap, and there's all that food coming in. You know, it's amazing, isn't it? How much food we can actually grow and still eat at this time of year. That was the only photo we got for the harvests for this week. So if you do take photos of your harvests, please do send them in. We'd love to see them. Money Roots challenge: get a soil testing kit and check your soil. I think I like that. I like that a lot, actually. I think that tallies up with what we're talking about tonight. Jenny says, challenge: make a tomato house to go on an outdoor bed if rain forecast, cold nights, etc., to try and help avoid the B word. You'll hear me talk about something like that on the podcast tomorrow, actually. I'll leave it like that. Challenge. My soil becomes like concrete in the hot summer months. How to change this? Is it just a matter of adding lots of compost? So my soil does exactly the same. It is a matter of adding lots of compost, but also mulching your soil, grass clippings, leaves, compost, to try and stop stop the soil from drying out. Just a few ideas. Scott says soil testing sound good. Anna Jones says test your soil for the challenge. Stuart Jackson says soil testing is a good idea for Richard and myself. Soil testing seems to be the popular vote. Nicholas says Charles Dowding just does a few centimeters of compost and no fertilizers. Yeah, we feeding the soil. It's the same we're trying to get to earlier, but not everybody is able to produce quite the same amount of compost that he is able to produce. And that's the goal. I think that is the goal, to be able to produce enough compost and not need to buy any in. Again, it's all about looking after that soil. My voice is going today. So soil testing is going to be for the challenge for next week. I'll get myself a soil testing kit and I will go and test my soil. I'll do 2 tests, one here at home and one on the allotment. As we got under 10 minutes to go for the show, has anybody got any other final thoughts on feeds and fertilizers they would like to share with us? Anything they want to add or anything like that? One thing that I want to add is it is possible to over fertilize the soil or over feed our plants. One of the problems some people have is when their tomatoes or whatever don't produce any flowers and they don't tend to produce any fruits, and often that is because they've been looked after too well. Overfeeding does become a bit of a problem. Something to think about. Digwell says, I saw the video where he brought in tons of compost as he could not make enough himself. Yeah, I've not seen that myself, but this is the problem, isn't it? If you've got to buy in tons of compost, it does get very expensive. And on my allotment, I think technically we're not allowed to bring in compost, so we've got to be very cautious about that as well. Charles Dowding does buy in manure too and composts wood chip. These are all things that we could be doing as well if we want to produce enough compost. It would be the dream to produce enough compost that we don't need to buy any compost in. We don't need to buy any feeds and fertilizers. We can use it as a mulch. It's just a challenge. It is just a challenge. Nicholas says, I think I could produce enough if I can get organized. I think you are probably right. With the 3 acres you've got, if you cut the grass regularly, you've got plenty of greens, you've got the animals for all the other bits, you've got woods and things for the browns as well. So you've got the possibility that you could produce enough, but it is a challenge. I think that's going to be my challenge for you, Nicola, to produce enough compost that you don't have to buy any in. I'm going to set you a challenge. Yeah, the price on my soil testing kit is £1.29. The date on it is 2019, so I think I will buy a new one. Tell you what, Stuart, if you do buy a new one, use both and see how the results compare. Digwell says, don't forget he is a market gardener trying to make a living. It's absolutely. He's a market gardener trying to make a living, trying to look after his soil as best as he can as well. There's nothing wrong with it, is there? There's nothing wrong. Bethan says, off-topic question. My peppers are producing fruits already. Crikey, that's done well. Should I remove the fruit? They never have done so well, so I'm not sure what to do. Are these in your hydroponics or under grow lights and heat? It does seem a little bit early, or are these going to go in a greenhouse or outside or anything like that? Gonna need a bit more information. Nicholas says, Stu, use old one and compare the results. Yeah, that's what I would do. If it was me, I would say yes, says Rob to Bethan. And Tammy Stream, I haven't brought compost in on my allotment, but I bought 3 tubs of chicken manure pellets from Wilco's. Still got 2 full up to use. Yeah, I've got to get chicken manure pellets because they seem to get very expensive lately. I thought they did anyway. Stuart, have a look at Haverstack soil test kit. I find the chip ones give varied results. There we go. They are under grow lights, but will go outside when the night temps are constant. So yeah, what would I do? What would I do? I would probably leave them, to be honest. You're going to pick the fruits anyway. I would probably leave them and see how they get. Or can you do run a bit of an experiment? That might be an idea. Run an experiment. Take some of the peppers off some of them and leave them on the other and see how they get. My peppers are still tiny seedlings. There we go. You need the energy for growing stronger plants before they fruit. It depends how big the plants are, though. The peppers, are they big pepper plants? Are they full size? And see what happens. Any photos this week? There was. We've only got about 3 minutes to go. I didn't actually get around to making a video, so let's see. Right, let's see if we can do this. Let's see if we can do wrong one. So let's put that on that. I'm going to go into the group and see what photos are going on in there. So apologies, I didn't get a video sense, a thing made. Jenny has shared this of her sweet potato rooting. Mine haven't rooted or done anything at all, but that's the idea going on there. We have got, scroll on down, lots of chat going on in the group. Please do. If you're not on Facebook, please join up and have a look at the group. There's lots going on. Nick, this is what she's been clearing. That's a lot of brambles. She has been very, very busy there. And that's before, and that is what it looks like after. Very, very busy work going on there. Just checking that it's actually being shared. Yep. What else have we got? Nathan, elephant garlic is coming along. That's a lot of elephant garlic. Looks fantastic, I've got to say. Excellent stuff. What else have we got? Scott, squash plants. Wow, that's a lot of squash plants as well. Looking great, though. Again, looking great. It's good to see so many plants and going on. There's a second picture as well. It's good to see so much happening in a greenhouse and stuff. Stuart has emptied his veggie pods so he can move it. They are weighty things. They are very weighty things, but good stuff. Good stuff. What have we got? What have we got? Scrolling down. Oh, there's a video from Kate of Dave, the head gardener. Dwarf tomatoes in hydroponics, says Steve there as well. Looks fantastic, doesn't it? Just quickly got to come back. Yeah, just checking there's no comments I've missed. Ginger growing well, says Jenny here too. Looks fantastic. My ginger hasn't started to sprout yet, so we're keeping a close eye on that. Maybe a little bit too cold for my ginger just yet, though. Steve says today I shall be mostly potting up brassicas. This is all in his agrarian plant starters. Fantastic things, aren't they? Fruit trees. Kate has inherited 7 fruit trees going on there. Excellent stuff. I think that will do for now, but you get the idea. Lots of photos going on in the group, and I will try and incorporate them a bit more next week. And just ran out of time this week. All right, so what have we got? Bethan says I will take a photo and post it tonight, and I'll do an experiment. I think it would be a cool experiment to see what it looks like. Nigel says, agree with Rob's allotment gardening about peppers. Yeah. It depends how big the pepper plants are, though. Cheers, mate. Thanks for the advice, says Bethan. The plants are about 20 centimeters tall, so they're pretty much fully grown, aren't they? They can still get a bit taller, but that's pretty damn good. Pretty damn good at all. Again, if it was me, I would remove them. Yeah, 20 centimeters. Do an experiment. Do an experiment. See how much of a difference it makes. Give you a bit of content as well, something to talk about in my eyes. I love when we do these experiments. I've just realised we're going into overtime. It is probably time that we got out of here. So, what we're going to talk about next week is probably what you want to know. So, next week, the subject I'm going to be talking about is when do you sow your winter crops, and what winter crops do you grow? This is something I think I've had a question coming quite a few times. I want to find out more from you. What winter crops you grow, when do you sow them, and things like that. That's going to be next week's subject. We're going to do the soil test as the mission, and we're going to be sowing radishes as well. Right, thanks so much for joining me. Thanks so much for your input on the feeds and fertilizers. It's been a really good conversation. Hope you've enjoyed it. Hope you got something out of it. Please do tell your friends and family about this show to try and bring them along. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow and click the notification so that you know when we go live. Right, and on that note, I will see you all again next week at 6, and we'll do it then. Take care, guys.